Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Coming up, China pledges to deepen strategic cooperation with UNESCO. Chinese ambassador to the U.S. calls for China and the United States to pursue mutual excellence rather than zero-sum competition. And we will take a look at the abnormal heat wave sweeping across India before the arrival of the traditional summer period. China's service trade, in particular exports, saw remarkable growth over the course of the first quarter. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on our previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. First up, Chinese President Xi Jinping says China is ready to work with UNESCO to expand access to the benefits of educational, scientific, and cultural development. He made remarks in a meeting with UNESCO Director General Khaled Al-Anani in Beijing. The Chinese leader has also called for stronger cooperation in artificial intelligence, open science, and digital education. Al-Anani said UNESCO looks forward to strengthening cooperation with China in advancing global education and cultural development, promoting science technology exchanges, and deepening AI cooperation. So for more, joining us now on the line is Han Hua, co-founder and secretary general with Beijing Club for International Dialogue. So thank you very much for joining us today, Han Hua. What do you think is the most important message from the top Chinese leader in this meeting with the UNESCO chief?
Well, thanks for having me, Ding Heng. In my opinion, the most important message from President Xi Jinping was that China sees multilateralism and civilizational dialogue as the foundation for the future international order. He mentioned and he even warned that Cold War thinking, unilateralism, and hegemonism are re-emerging. She used this meeting with UNESCO leader to reaffirm China's support for the United Nations system and for the global governance based on cooperation rather than bloc politics or geopolitical confrontation. See, we know that in the history, United States has withdrawn from UNESCO for 3 times, all for its so-called domestic purposes. But we know that against this backdrop, China's insistence and China's reaffirmation to enhance the collaboration and the support for the UNESCO development is very important. Last but not least, it is President Xi's emphasis on linking education, science, culture, and the artificial intelligence. He mentioned in particular the digital education to the idea of a shared future for mankind. And it is also in the framework of China's 4 global initiatives, especially the global civilizational dialogue. So I think this is very important that China wants to help and facilitate UNESCO to play a larger role, not only in cultural exchange, but also in shaping global norms for emerging technologies and development. And further, maybe UNESCO can be an integral part of the new regulations, new framework, not only narrative, rhetoric, but new framework for AI governance, for example.
UNESCO is very much dedicated to fostering peace, security, and international cooperation through education, science, and culture. Khaled Al-Anani says that China is one of the UN agency's most important partners. So what has China contributed to UNESCO over the years, in your opinion?
Well, first thing first, China pays its financial obligations to UNESCO as well as to United Nations on time, very timely, every year. So this is, in my opinion, one of the most important contributions to UNESCO for its daily operations, especially at a time when some major powers and also some other other leading economies, they either withdrew from UNESCO or they fall behind on their financial obligations. They didn't pay their the membership fee undue. So China has distinguished itself as a very stable and also reliable supporter of this organization, and by constantly, like I said, paying the membership dues on time, backing UNESCO's long-term missions, and also supporting UNESCO's in its each and every project globally. This kind of reliability has strengthened China's standing as one of UNESCO's most important partners. So it's definitely not a surprise for the leader of UNESCO. Anani said that China is one of the most important partners. And over the years, China has also contributed beyond the financial obligations. It played a more and more important role politically and institutionally to UNESCO's daily agenda, especially in education, in science development, and in cultural dialogues. It has supported numerous programs on poverty reduction, on literacy, teacher training, digital education, and South-South cooperation. These cooperations based on many practices and many projects, particularly in those developing countries across Africa and Asia. This also contributed a lot. I think in terms of some business language or terminology, it brings more assets and it enhances UNESCO's assets globally. China has also played a major role in cultural preservation. This we all know because these are some high-profile cases on World Heritage with UNESCO, on the World Heritage's protection and safeguarding those intangible cultural heritages. I think this, over the years, this has built up a very excellent track record for Beijing, for China to be maybe the only major power that could help stabilize UNESCO's current status and its future development.
Needless to say, UNESCO represents a critical leader in terms of thinking ahead about establishing some kind of responsible frameworks to reap the benefits of AI, while at the same time putting in place effective AI protections for societies, especially the children and the younger generation, for example. So how do you think this pledge to deepen AI cooperation between China and UNESCO could bring to global AI development?
Yeah, I think one of the most important milestones for AI global development is the AI governance. Certainly, we need major powers to play more important role in AI governance, but UNESCO can be regarded as one of these significant pillars in terms of deepen AI cooperation and future develop this AI governance and to help come up with the framework for AI governance, especially when at a time when the world is struggling to balance technological innovation with ethical safeguards. So UNESCO can play the role, maybe probably leaning towards the ethical safeguarding part in particular. And China, of course, the United States, the world's leading AI powers. And the UNESCO can play a key international platform for developing norms on AI ethics, AI education, inclusive digital development. I think this kind of cooperation, either under UNESCO framework or between China and the UNESCO, hopefully also between UNESCO and the United States, can help bridge the gap between technological capacity and global governance. Another aspect is the potential to make AI governance more inclusive and less dominated by a small group of advanced Western economies, not only by Silicon Valley or the other powers. So through UNESCO, the world, especially the less developed countries in global South, countries in African countries, they can view, through UNESCO, they can view China as a more supporting role in these countries and providing more digital infrastructure, providing more infrastructure in capacity building, and help narrow the global digital divide.
Last month, UNESCO appointed Professor Chen Qun, who is a distinguished physicist, education specialist, and former deputy mayor of Shanghai, as the UN agency's Assistant Director General for Education. So, to China, what do you make of the meaning of this appointment? And what could be China's role in shaping the future of global education or learning leadership?
Professor Chen Qun used to be the former president of East China Normal University, where there is a UNESCO center built in this university. So East China Normal University has played a very significant role in bridging and facilitating UNESCO's footprint in China and through China to those developing countries. So East China Normal University has played a very interesting, like a bridge. And Professor Chen Qun definitely showed his leadership in his capacity as the president, also helped to facilitate the development of this center. So I think it's a very significant appointment, but it's also a very natural appointment to ask to have Professor Chen to dedicate his capabilities, not only in the science field, but also under his leadership to continue this kind of practices. So it's not a symbolic appointment at all, but it's carries a lot of real content and substance. For example, in expanding access to education through the practices with East China Normal University, and to help reduce illiteracy in those less and very underdeveloped countries, to advance the digital learning through many practices in China and beyond, and to improve science and technology education, and to how to apply these technologies and advanced technologies in particular into daily operation and daily practices. I think there are a lot of very good cases accumulated in the past years. So it's for Professor Chen Qun, it's like a continuation from his East China Normal University's capacity, from his deputy mayor of Shanghai, who used to be taking care of these areas, science development, education development in Shanghai, to a broader role to take care of the global participation and engagement under UNESCO's framework. So the appointment also gives China a stronger voice in shaping international discussions under UNESCO's framework on the future of education, what China thinks, what kind of China model can help the world at a time when this rapid technological and social transformation is happening.
Thank you very much for joining us. Han Hua, co-founder and Secretary General of Beijing Club for International Dialogue. Coming up, Chinese ambassador calls for China and the United States to pursue mutual excellence rather than zero-sum competition. This is World Today. Stay tuned. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Chinese ambassador to the United States, Xie Feng, says China hopes an upcoming summit between the two heads of state will help steer bilateral ties towards stable and constructive development. In an interview with American media outlet Newsweek, the ambassador said that President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump have maintained close communications through phone calls, letters, and meetings. Xie Feng has called for China and the United States to expand dialogue and cooperation while properly managing differences. He added that a stable bilateral relationship serves both countries' interests and meets the expectation of the international society amid growing international turbulence. Joining us now on the line is Professor Liu Baochen, Director of the Center for International Business Ethics with the University of International Business and Economics. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
So the ambassador says that in an increasingly turbulent world, the strategic value of China-U.S. relationship becomes more prominent. In your understanding, Professor Liu, what is the strategic value of the China-U.S. relationship?
Now, China and the United States are the world's two largest economies. They are also permanent members of the UN Security Council. More practically, they are the key actors in global trade, finance, technology, climate change governance, and regional security. So the strategic value lies in that whether these two countries can cooperate and compete constructively. So this will mean a lot for regional and global stability as well as economic prosperity. So in terms of the trade and investment, the bilateral trade has already exceeded more than $500 billion US dollars, and investment has been quite significant. We also host the hundreds of thousands of US companies firmly invested with a foothold in China. And strategically, so a stable China-US relationship will serve as an anchor against the current global fragmentation and uncertainty. Now, on the other hand, both countries also face a number of internal challenges in terms of the economic growth, in terms of the energy security, technological disruption. So there is every reason for these two countries to come and work together to solve common regional and global problem, and also to mutually assist each other in generating more of the conducive environment to host the global investment, and also to work on the common challenges we are facing for healthcare issues, for climate change issues. So in the end, I think the competition is not more fearful, but rather whether competition can be managed in a responsible fashion without sliding into confrontation or decoupling. And this is something that both countries need to take far more responsibility and also exercising wisdom to manage.
Yeah, I remember the ambassador noted that he hopes that the upcoming top leaders meeting in Beijing would explore a right way for the two parties to get along in the new era based on mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and a win-win cooperation. Those are very precious spirits put forward by the Chinese side. And let's be cautiously optimistic that this upcoming meeting would really chart the right course for bilateral ties. Now, Professor, regarding the Taiwan question, the Chinese ambassador called on Washington to commit to the One China principle, as well as the three China-U.S. joint communique with concrete actions. He is describing the Taiwan question as the biggest barrier to the bilateral ties, a burden that is risking dragging the two countries into conflicts, confrontation. And also on Wednesday, Beijing reiterated its strong opposition and concern about continued U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. So what roles do you expect the Taiwan question to play during President Donald Trump's visit this time?
Well, definitely the Taiwan question concerns the sovereignty and territorial integrity, and therefore constitute a core interest that cannot be compromised from the Chinese perspective. And China consistently emphasized the One China principle and the three China-U.S. joint communiques that form the political foundation of bilateral relationship. So therefore, issues such as the U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, official interaction, or perceived shifts in Washington's Taiwan policy are viewed in China as directly affecting the strategic trust that needs to be repaired for a better recovery. And this is precisely why the Taiwan question carries such a important weight. If the handled improperly, it could really become a trigger for a broader confrontation. But on the other hand, if we manage prudently through diplomacy, communication, strategic constraint, it can really remain under control. So in the end, I would expect both sides will reaffirm their established positions during this visit. The key question is whether they can really strengthen the guardrails and crisis management mechanism to avoid further escalation.
President Xi Jinping has previously said that the hope of the China-U.S. relationship lies in the people. Its foundation is in our societies. Its future depends on the younger generation or on the youth. And its vitality is coming from exchanges at some kind of, subnational levels. And this point has been repeated by the Chinese ambassador in this particular interview with Newsweek. So, Professor, are you confident that people-to-people exchanges between the two sides will somehow continue with good momentum?
Yes, I'm relatively confident because despite all the political tensions and some of the uncertainties that have been created, there is still a strong base for mutual interest between the peoples of these two countries to work together and exchange with each other in multiple sectors like education, culture, tourism, business, healthcare, and also the academic exchanges. So if we look at the past history, people-to-people exchange have often served as a stabilizing force during some of the difficult periods in our bilateral relationship, universities, exchanges, sister cities, business associations, etc. So these really do contribute to maintaining the communication, even if official ties encounter some of the challenges. Definitely, the youth exchange are particularly important. As a matter of fact, all age brackets should be there to come up with a more positive role in communicating with each other and also in identifying some of the differences, but in a more constructive way. So therefore, the subnational type of cooperation remains highly practical. So many U.S. states and Chinese cities maintain strong economic ties with each other. So in the long run, a stable China-U.S. relationship cannot solely rely on high-level diplomacies or ad hoc campaigns. They require a more coherent and consistent and even broader public support and continued the societal interaction and mutually beneficial cooperation that can lead to a positive outcome.
So very briefly, the final question, Professor. Personally, speaking from a personal perspective, do you look forward to teaching students from America on your own campus?
Well, I have been teaching all the time, actually.
Okay.
Both on my campus and also online to some of the U.S. universities. So I found that the interaction has been highly energizing on both sides, and at least we are able to identify the truths and also the facts that are in the way of blocking further understanding. And now, the sharing knowledge in a digital world is becoming even more important, both for our scholars and also for the students.
Sounds very exciting. Professor Liu Baochen, Director of the Center for International Business Ethics, joining us from the UIBE. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. We'll be back after a very short break.
Hello, my name is Alessandro Golombiewski Teixeira. I'm a professor of public policy and management at Tsinghua University in Beijing. I am a great listener of The World Today. In my opinion, The World Today is one of the best China radio programs. In The World Today, we can get the best news and analysis in what is happening now in the world. So please come to join us.
You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. A senior China advisor with the American Carter Center says both China and the United States are facing growing international challenges and need a more stable external environment. His remarks comes as U.S. President Donald Trump pays a state visit to China between Wednesday and Friday. In a conversation with my colleague Song Ruixing, Dr. Liu Yawei noted that this year is carrying symbolic significance. Namely, the United States is marking the country's 250th anniversary, while China is beginning the implementation of the country's new 5-year plan. He said both leaders of the China and the United States need to establish a long-term framework to prevent future instability and keep bilateral ties on a stable track.
You've spent decades studying U.S.-China relations from Beijing and Atlanta. What was your first real encounter with the United States as a political system?
I went to Hawaii. It was in Hawaii that I observed my first presidential election in 1988. So it was a race between the Republican candidate George H.W. Bush and the Democratic candidate Michael Dukakis. And eventually, George H.W. Bush won the election. Later, he led the U.S. into one of the more successful wars U.S. had conducted. That is to drive the Iraqis out of Kuwait. I think Americans are still learning the lessons from that war. It failed to learn from that war and got dragged down into the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. So that year, in 1988, I had this eyewitness account of the American presidential race and realized that, this country was governed every 4 years. Every 4 years, there's a complete policy change. And we are seeing it unfolding again now.
Hearing you describe your early impressions of the American political system makes me wonder how differently the two sides now perceive each other. I mean, U.S. President Trump's visit to China is being framed differently in Beijing and Washington. Do people on either side genuinely expect substantive progress, or is the priority now simply preventing further deterioration?
No, I think Americans and the Chinese, ordinary people, they have different views of each other. I think there's also the very prominent elite view of each other. So how people view the other side will have some impact on how decision makers are going to make their decision accordingly. Even though U.S. and China have different political systems, I think the leaders eventually will respond to the views of the people in different ways. Recently, the Carter Center has conducted surveys of how Americans are being viewed by the Chinese and how the Chinese people see the relationship. Where do Chinese people think the country is going to go? I think the Chinese side are more confident of the power of China, whereas American surveys, polls show that many Americans believe economically China and the U.S. are on the same footing. But militarily, obviously, U.S. is still the most powerful country in the world. And I think more Chinese believe that China will win the trade war eventually, whereas Americans have less confidence in the Trump administration to win the trade war.
So from your observation, what would count as success for each side right now?
I think number one, if two countries can agree to some extent on where the bilateral trade is going to be, whether tariff is going to be reduced. Secondly, the investment front. I think this is less clear whether any consensus can be reached. Thirdly, I think both countries needs to agree to some extent, how the war in Iran is going to end. And lastly, I think on the AI frontier, both sides are extremely concerned in terms of the rivalry, in terms of where this race is going to go, and in terms of the AI implication in warfighting capabilities. And in 2024, the US side and China side agreed that in nuclear war decision making, AI will be excluded. But there's a lot more for both sides to work on the AI side. So any of the agreements on the areas I mentioned can be considered as a success. But of course, I think both leaders should look at the next close to 3 years when Trump is still in the office, that more agreement could be hammered out so the relationship will be in better shape in the position that the future leaders of the US, both in the executive branch as well as in the congressional side, are not going to be able to destabilize the relationship again. That's what I care the most, is both sides will try to hammer out some long-term framework so that they can peacefully coexist and respect each other, and then look for ways to engage in win-win cooperation.
Then, if official diplomacy is increasingly, let's say, constrained, some of the most meaningful communication may now be happening outside formal government channels. I mean, the Carter Center, which was founded around conflict resolution dialogue, at a time when official US-China communication is increasingly constrained, what can track 2 diplomacy still realistically accomplish?
Well, obviously, we talked about the official relationship between the two countries, and both you and me understand, that relationship, of course, is in some sort of difficulty. But we are at a time where both leaders are inclined to stabilize the relationship, to find a new framework for the relationship to re-normalize. When we talk about normalization, of course, that's a decision that was started by Nixon back in 1972, but it was really my boss, President Jimmy Carter, that made the bold and courageous decision to normalize the relationship. Now the relationship is in huge difficulty. It needs to be renormalized. Of course, to renormalize the relationship, both sides needs to come to very clear ideas of where are the red lines and how the red lines are not going to be crossed. On that front, track 2, or societal effort, will not be playing a huge role. I don't think the Carter Center now can really impact US-China relationship directly. However, we are more on the people's business. This relationship is not just being built on the foundation of a consensus among the leaders, but it is also built on very thick friendship, understanding that both peoples are special, that both peoples and both countries are making a huge contribution to the peace and prosperity of not only of their countries, but also of their adjacent areas, but also to the whole world. I mean, this year obviously is a major year for the US. US is going to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of this country. And of course, on the China side, just get the 15th five-year plan into place, and China also needs to deepen the reform of its economic sector, and also to find ways to be more impactor on global affairs. So both countries are now encountering domestic and overseas problems. Both countries need a better international environment to improve their domestic sector. So I think there are some common areas where the leaders, hopefully, in discussion on Thursday. Whatever happens at the top, I think will have some impact in terms of what we do at the bottom. And day in, day out, we're trying to increase better understanding among the peoples of the US and China. And that better understanding will put the bilateral relationship in a good framework with guardrails erected.
Well, that was Dr. Liu Yawei, a senior advisor on China at the American Carter Center, talking with my colleague Song Ruixing. This is World Today. We'll be back. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. India is battling with record-breaking heat waves. On April the 27th, out of the world's top 50 hottest cities were reportedly in the single country of India. Data from air quality monitoring platform AQI shows the average peak temperature across those cities reached somewhere around 44.7 degrees Celsius. The extreme heat has raised the concern over public health, agriculture, water supplies, and the wider impact of climate change on developing countries. So for more on this, my colleague Gao Yingshi earlier spoke with Professor Qu Qiang from Minzu University of China.
On April 27, all of the world's top 50 hottest cities were reportedly in India. How extreme was this event, and what does it tell us about the scale of extreme heat India is currently facing?
This actually is very, very extreme because there's no predecessors. There's no former examples. I think according to data, by the day of the 27th of April, I think probably the top 1 to top 50 hottest city, literally hottest city, has been all the Indian cities. So probably this is going to be the hottest April, and many record has been, breaking out. For example, in this 50 Indian cities, basically average temperature would be more than 44.7 degrees Celsius. And also in Banda, I think the highest temperature can be 46.2 degrees Celsius, and even it can be 35 degrees Celsius in the midnight. So which means that it's going to be very, very dangerous because it's ultraviolet, ray, and also the heat wave probably will generate lots of the deaths. And also this is just a beginning. And this kind of the hot wave is going to be expanding to a wider zone covering many parts of the subcontinent. So I think that is why it's so extreme.
And what is driving India's increasing intense and early heat waves? And to what extent can they be linked to broader climate change or regional weather patterns such as El Nino, or maybe local factors such as urbanization?
So number one, I think generally we're facing this kind of the warming cycle in the history and the climate. So India and this top 50 cities with the hottest temperature is just one extreme example, just another extreme example. And also, you're mentioning about some other coincidence. For example, the overlapping effect of the El Nino effect. This year, we're going to face a very strong and very likely, very possible El Nino effect in probably from the May to the July. And I think the probability is more than 60%. And that is when the seasonal wind season happening in the India continent. So when there's two effects doubling together, you're going to see probably the heat is going, through the roof. And also in the whole region, I've been in the subcontinent because of the west wind disruptions. We've been seeing that in the whole subcontinent, the whole water falling rate is much lower than average years, especially compared to 100 years ago. You're seeing basically they've been reduced by 60% of the raindrop into the soil, and the soil are so dry, so it can be easily temperature up by this extreme weathers. And also, if you take a look at the micro factors, for example, like the urbanization and local industries, India has been developing really fast and building lots of the concrete buildings in the city. They try to revitalize all those kind of a shanty town, and they also want to build some heavy industries. And all those use of the concrete, all this use of the building materials, and all those emissions of the the greenhouse gases, the warm house effect has been there. So overlapping with all these kind of factors, you're seeing this extreme weather coming towards them.
Extreme heat is often described as the deadliest from the extreme weather. So, which groups are most vulnerable in India currently? And how could sustained high temperatures affect the public health or agricultural sectors and maybe the wider economy?
This is a climate event, but I think the most vulnerable group can be people for sure. These kind of hot inequalities happening everywhere in India right now, especially the outdoor workers, like the vendors, like the construction workers, like the delivery man, postman, and all those people basically have no place to cool themselves down. And also, when we're talking about the very large shanty town in India, the basically lack of stable, power, electricity. They don't have clean water, and even they have electric fan, but they cannot afford the electric bill. So it's going to be very, very dangerous. And also talking about senior people and the children, and also pregnant women. So every year we're talking about 400 million people, labor work people are exposed in this extreme high weather. And when, temperature going up by 1 degree Celsius, their income is going to be reduced, and also their damage physically or even deaths can be appearing. Personally, I experienced that extreme heat in India before. Oh my God, I can tell you, when you are exposed in more than 30 degrees outdoor temperatures, basically there have no way to hide yourself. I basically are dehydrated, like 80% of the time every day. But I'm saying most of the manual labor workers, they don't have this privilege to hide themselves in the hotel room with the air conditioners eventually at the night. And so because of that, public health event can be happening. And more than that, a spillover can happen with agriculture and a food shock. Because in India, 50% of the agriculture relies on the natural raindrop with the monsoon. And now, if you have this extreme heat, so the raindrop will be reduced, and also the food crop, the crop and the food yielding and harvest will also be reduced. So, which means after several months, you're going to see a major food crisis happening in India. And meanwhile, some other problem will also happen, like, in some region, you're probably going to see drought, and also you're going to see the overload of the power grid, and then leading to the fire, and also you're going to see some many other problem happening. For example, the stop of the factory, so leading to the unemployment and also the reduction in the salary of ordinary families and workers.
Talking about India, it's not just India. Their problem India is currently facing can reflect the situation in many developing nations. What does India's experience reveals about broader impact of climate change on developing nations, especially those with large populations, large outdoor workforces, and heavy dependence on agriculture?
I think especially the climate change and its disaster is lethal towards developing nations, towards many fragile South-South countries. For example, many South-South nations actually have very large outdoor manual labors, agriculture, population, and itself have very large density of the population inside of the village and also inside of the city. Their previous living standards are just enough to make sure that they can survive their basic living standards and survival need. But now, when this extreme event are happening, extreme heat and also lack of water, lack of power, will probably crush them with the last straw of the grass. We are also seeing the problem with infrastructures. I think the natural disaster or extreme weather event can be the touchstone for the infrastructure's gap, like the power, water supply, public health, and all that will challenge the government and the providers of the public services. Sometimes the government is very hard to make sure they understand the gravity, they know the details of each region, each town, each a county or each neighborhood, how many senior people are there, what's the gap of the power supply, do they have clean water or not, do we have enough medicines to cope with all those demand happening with extreme heat. And last but not least is the fragility of your economy, because South nations always do not have so many of the fiscal resources to help them to buffer with extreme weathers and also the extra costs happening with that. So all that need to be solved in the future, and this is just a warning shot by the weather, and there's going to be more to come.
That was Professor Qu Qiang from Minzu University of China, speaking with my colleague Gao Yingshi. This is World Today. Stay tuned. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Official data shows that China's exports in services grew by more than 11% year-on-year during the first quarter of 2026. The total value of service imports and exports reached more than 1.8 trillion yuan, or more than 260 billion US dollars during that period. Travel service exports jumped by more than 32%, the highest among all service export sectors. Imports of transportation services recorded an increase of over 22%. Personal, cultural, and entertainment services recorded export gains of over 25%. So for more, joining us now on the line is Professor Jiang Gong from the University of International Business and Economics. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So first of all, from an overall picture, do you think the services industry has already become a key engine of growth for China's overall foreign trade? Why or why not?
Well, I think at least looking at the travel service, look at the transportation services, clearly the data is showing that they represent a fairly robust growth area. I think we can categorize as a major key engine of growth for China's overall foreign trade in services. Especially, I think, things related to travel and tourism. You look at the travel services exports jumped by 32%. What that really means is the revenues derived from foreigners visiting China. That's our travel service exports, right? And the other way traffic is also increasing quite rapidly. Imports of transport services, that is associated with Chinese tourists, partly driven by Chinese tourists traveling abroad on various transportation means, mostly flights, I guess. And that clearly indicates that the traffic is going up. It's going up by over 22%. So I think it's pretty clear that tourism traffic in both directions are increasing quite rapidly. And I would imagine that there'll be more potential in these areas.
So, like you said, in terms of the travel service exports, we're actually talking about a scenario where some international passport holders are visiting China for tourism or for other purposes. Why do you think this area was such a big highlight for China during the first quarter?
Well, I remember China introduced some visa-free kind of a policy. Make things a lot easier for foreign tourists and travelers to come to China. And it's clearly being reflected by the statistics. I think, the China, again, is becoming a quite touristy place, driven by, I think, the new narrative about China. It's a very advanced country. Its infrastructure is next to none. Some people even go as far as saying China today represents the future, and you want to have a taste of the future, come to China. So I think it's becoming increasingly attractive to a lot of young people around the world. And another thing I want to point out is that if you look at the pricing levels here in China, they're very competitive. I think overall things are quite affordable compared to Europe, compared to North America. So I think these are the factors driving this phenomenon that more and more people, more and more visitors, tourists are coming to China. It's becoming a lot easier to come. It's becoming a lot affordable to come. And most importantly, it's becoming more enjoyable to come, I guess. So, this is driving the exports of our services in travel and tourism.
I think it's also pretty interesting for us to pay some attention to the realm of personal, cultural, and entertainment services exports. And in this regard, I guess we're mostly talking about exports of, say, popular Chinese short dramas, etc., products like that. Why do you think these services or products are increasingly gaining market overseas? And what do you think this ongoing trend, tells us about China's soft power across the world today?
Yeah, well, I think it's partly explained by the increase in soft power. That's without a doubt. As China becomes more prosperous, more attractive, wealthier, definitely its appeal to the foreign audience is increasing. But I think another quite interesting and important reason has to do with the expansion of Chinese digital platforms in many other countries. We're talking about TikTok, for example. We're talking about, other digital platforms being, widely deployed and used in many other countries. And that inevitably leads to, the foreign audience access to a lot of Chinese created content. Which ultimately, translates into revenues for China. These are our exports of cultural entertainment services. So I think that's also a quite important reason, in my view, as to why Chinese culture, entertainment, content-related stuff are, getting accessible, getting accessed by international audience, by a global audience. That's a very good thing for China.
Professor, we still have about 1 minute or so before we need to wrap up. So finally, Chinese policymakers have already realized the importance of branding for Chinese services or China services. So in this regard, what do you think are some of the key issues that should be addressed at the policy level?
Yeah, well, I think an important issue is that a brand of a Chinese company or Chinese product it never exists sort of in isolation, a vacuum. It's part of the larger China brand, right? It's there's some synergies among a lot of products, individual company brands, and they jointly sort of influence each other and jointly constitute this larger China brand. So I think we need to really treasure the value of this brand, the China brand. So from a policy perspective, we need to support and treasure the value of the overall China brand. It's quite difficult it takes a long time to establish brand, but it takes one day to
destroy it,
to destroy and collapse this brand. Yes, yeah. So I think from that perspective, we'd be very careful about this and really,
Thank you very much. Professor Zhang Gong joining us from the University of International Business and Economics. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. Bye for now.